constructs, and transformative technologies. Right.
Thank you.
I want to please welcome Dr. Judy Bentley.
Thank you. I'm really very honored to be here at this conference. And I just wanted to say that yesterday, this was eco-ability. Today, it's exponentially deeper and broader and more interesting and more wonderful just from the presentations this morning. So thank you very much. I'm actually talking about my own chapter in eco-ability. And I'm looking at the intersection between the work of Foucault and the work of David Pellow on toxic environments and toxic racism. Since this is a new discipline and a new conference, I just wanted to, just for a second, go over the definition of eco-ability as it is in the book. Matt said this morning it's in formative stages, and that's true. But eco-ability is interdisciplinary and it's intersectional. So eco-ability promotes innovative activism in which scholars and activists work together to achieve meaningful change. It calls for new ways of imagining and practicing mutually respectful relationships with all forms of life. Intersectionality really comes from a definitive article by Elizabeth McCall in Women's Studies. This particular type of intersectionality that we work with in eco-ability is anti-categorical, meaning that oppressed group categories are much too narrow and too simplistic to serve as tools for real understanding. So what we're calling for is the dismantling of borders between groups. These groups were originally based on race, class, sexuality, gender. Now they're based also, we say, on speciesism, ageism, and non-human animals. In the archaeology of knowledge, Foucault talks about a deeply hidden order of things, or a deep hierarchy that's so deep in our souls, beyond the place of language, that every socially constructed identity and every ism like ageism or sexism or racism is something that's so deep that in order for us to change it or to think about it or to discuss it or to make any progress towards something that is not ageist or racist, we have to really excavate our own thinking. I've had to excavate my own thinking this morning listening to some of the presentations. Foucault says that these structures of knowledge have changed, and he looks at change over millennia. I'm thinking that today we have achieved really rapid paradigm change right here in this room, so it's a lot faster than it used to be. Paradigms persist unexamined, but we need to dig them up from our own thinking, and we need to dig them up from the thinking of others and question them, and then they can truly be changed in our time. Foucault called himself a historian of thought, and his genealogy is really a history of what people were thinking in a certain time and place. Traditional history tells you what people are doing in a certain time and place. Genealogy tells you what people were thinking about and why they thought that was the right thing to be thinking about and why they thought it was right to be doing it. From the genealogy, Foucault found disciplines, and every discipline has its own specialized language. We've talked already about medical language, which situates disability as pathology within an individual. We've talked about scientific language and scientific experimentation on animals. There's also academic language, and I find it interesting to look at Foucault's work because there's an academic elitism associated with that as well. There are many special interest groups and Foucault scholars that get together and say, you can't possibly understand Foucault unless you have several PhDs and you've read him for 20 years, and even then you can't really understand, but we're getting together and you can't come because you don't understand him. So it's ironic to me, I guess, that he's talking about othering, he's talking about elitism, he's talking about exclusion, and groups are formed using his work that do the same thing. That's exactly the opposite of what we're doing here with eco-abilities. He does show that these paradigms change over time. And paradigms are really created by an oppressive group naming and claiming an identity for the group that is oppressed. So the idea of what we might call normal is probably different within each one of us, but there are also groups that have identify what normal is, and once you start to identify what normal is, then you have to talk about what normal is not. So that's how all of these isms get started. We've talked a lot about what is natural, and we've talked today about what is meat, and the people that have defined this for the most part, and the people that are behind the prevailing paradigms are the ones that tell us what these things mean. Foucault says you need to look at those, you need to dig really deep into your own consciousness and into the consciousness of the culture and the history, and then you can change it. All you need to do is question it. David Tello very recently has talked about and written about environmental justice, and he has talked about the idea that all the toxic chemicals, all the polluting chemicals, and all the killing waste of the world is concentrated in communities where people are poor, where people lack education, where they lack information, where they lack the power of change, and therefore they're kind of defined in terms of their market value, and that racism itself, he has shown, is very toxic. Because if you look at toxicity, it's in the areas, the same areas where racism exists. And he has done a lot of very interesting and deep writing on that, so I'm not going to talk about that. What I would like to is build on it. And I'd like to look at creating a genealogy or history of thought of toxicity. So I'm looking at a history of toxic thought as it applies to disability and as it applies to non-human animals. Tello says that toxicity maims, debilitates, and kills. We've already heard Peter Singer's name mentioned this morning. Peter Singer says, a child born with a disability is not a person. And I quote him, I always make sure that I say I'm quoting him exactly. He says, it is okay to kill him. A child is born with a disability. It's okay to kill him because his parents, after all, really want a normal child. And any child that has a cognitive disability in particular is not a person and should therefore be killed. And I don't know how he gets from his work on animals to the things that he says about human animals, but that's probably another chapter, another book. If you look at factory farming, if you look at corporate agribusiness, if you look at scientific experimentation, it also maims, debilitates, and kills, and is therefore toxic. Toxicity oppressively shapes its subjects, according to Tello. A disabled human animal has historically been seen as a burden on society because it's difficult for them to have jobs, be productive, and pay their taxes. They have also been seen as an eternal infant. If you look back at the poster children for polio in the 1950s, they were all children, and they were all photographed to look at as objects of pity. And the children that actually saw those posters that actually had polio thought two things. They thought, oh, I must be cured because there are no adults with polio, or I'm going to die because there are no adults with polio. They were looked at as eternal infants. People with cognitive disabilities are looked at and talked about and treated as if they are children. I have been in some very, I call them oppressive, self-contained classrooms for children with cognitive disabilities, multiple disabilities, where I see the same curriculum with students 21 years old that I see in preschools. I've seen these young men and women with cognitive disabilities in self-contained classrooms having Fisher-Price toys as their academic tools for learning. And this is still happening. If this were all changing and it was almost better, we would still be writing and talking about it, but this is still happening. This is Ashley X, the pillow angel, this little girl here. Her parents, out of great love and concern for how she would be taken care of after they were no longer living, had her have very radical surgery, which is called the Ashley treatment. The Ashley treatment is still being practiced on individuals with severe multiple disabilities. Ashley could not speak, she could not walk, so her parents said, well, in order for her to be more easy to pick up and carry from room to room. And in order